Welcome to Big 20, a roundtable discussion where GMs from all walks of life discuss gaming and field questions from viewers. Hosts this week are...
Hello, I am Scrim. I've been playing RPGs for a good 6 years and have DM'd and played many a different game. You can find me pretty often on the Shadowcasters Network, where I have a regular show and occasional short arcs as well.
My name's Chad. I am a host on Fear the Boot, and apparently I'm also a host on Big 20 as well.
And I'm Pedro, the GM and creator of the World Walkers Universe podcast series that takes place inside D&D, Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and Savage Worlds.
All right, and this week we are talking about lasting villains. Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll go first. So, lasting villains, I think beyond just, them lasting past the third round of combat, we're talking about, we're talking about villains that are memorable beyond either the game or they are very memorable throughout the game. And really, I think to make a villain that is memorable like that, you have to make them likable. You have to make them relatable, likable, and you can kind of see where they're coming from, maybe even if you don't agree with it. Or maybe you don't have all the information and they are bad, but they're doing it for this other reason. Or maybe you think, well, there's got to be some other explanation. Essentially, you have to make them a multifaceted, interesting character beyond just, Adolf Hitler. You have to make them,
Sorry, Hitler liked to paint.
Hitler did. He loved animals and children. He was a vegetarian. Yeah, and he murdered a lot of Jews.
Also, really terrible guy.
It's a big ass.
Yeah, just horrible person in general. But people did like him. Would I say Hitler is a good villain? Well, I wasn't around to
so glad
I wouldn't think he would be.
Wow, we went from zero to Hitler real quick.
That does actually bring up another point too. You need to make a villain likable, right? Or relatable. So how far do you go with the evil, right?
Can I offer a counterpoint or a question? So what about somebody like Cersei Lannister? She's a villain, but we also, most people don't like her. We love to hate her.
Yeah.
What about something like that?
That's where I go. I think there's always that thing of the difference between love, or the opposite of love is not hate but indifference. Like when people are indifferent to your villains, oh my God, then this is really hard. I keep trying to find relevance, but if they hate, then that's amazing. And there's the difference between hate and love to hate, because you can be annoyed and fed up with a villain, but unless you love to hate them, that's why there's always a discussion about which Final Fantasy villain's the best, because everybody has a different reason why they love to hate a villain. And they'll be like, I hate Kefka, but I love Sephiroth. And someone else is like, Sephiroth is a fucking anime villain, but I love whoever the dude in 9 was. I didn't play 9.
Yeah.
There might be something about likability, though, that makes a villain where you do enjoy hating them a little bit.
I think there's a lot of different ways you can make a meal. There's always different kinds of ingredients, but I think it always is going to come down to what you love to play as the GM too, because if you don't love your villain, then it's going to be really hard for players to love to hate the villain.
Well, and you have to balance too. Love to hate them is great, but if the players hate them so much, they are so unreprehensible. They are just reprehensible. They are just cannot forgive them. Horrible, love to hate them villain. Then the players can't interact with them. You can't role play as the villain or with the players, because suddenly the villain goes from this interesting, nuanced, huge, a lot of lore, a lot of plot line, all this stuff you've put into him. And now the players are like, if I see him, I'm shooting him in the face.
Mm.
It's like, well, he has a lot of guards and they'll kill you. No, he is so evil, I am willing to die to kill him. And it's just like, well, okay, yeah, you made them love to hate him, maybe a little too much, you know? And once you get to that point, that's real hard to scale back too.
Yeah.
It's not like you can say, oops, sorry, I burned the orphanage.
And it might be semantics, but that's where I think it would cross over from love to hate, which is they're enjoying it, to just hate. Like moving from, oh my God, I cannot wait to put this guy down, to like, if we don't kill him this session, all of you fuckers are dead. I'm going to burn your sheets and none of you are going to get home. And it's like, wait, what? Why do you mean by not getting home? And it's like, don't fucking worry about it. Tonight. Like,
I think there's an element there of integration with the players too. So if they like are going to shoot on sight, they have no reason to keep him alive. So maybe there's some sort of Harry Potter Voldemort connection where if he dies, the other one dies, or something like that. Or maybe they have information or something that the players want. I think it has to be kind of messy, and they have to have their lives integrated in some way, or the story at very least integrated in some way.
That's why some of the best villains aren't really villains, they're rivals. They're like them. Sometimes like the person that you're setting up as the big bad doesn't ever register as much as that rival adventure group, or that other mage that graduated with you. Like, sometimes you get the best. That's why like love to hate so important, because sometimes the best villains come out of the backstory. They're not even your villains, or the ones that somebody else came up with. And you're like, oh shit, I guess I'll add that in. I had a campaign where the big evil villain was this emperor of a floating island, but the thing that they really were obsessed with was the fact that they were getting help from the father of a previous player, and he had been building these machinations to take over everything and fill the void of the emperor. That's who they really were into. Like, they eventually did get up to the emperor and stuff like that too, but for the longest time, when that guy betrayed him, I didn't even care about the emperor. Like, we got other stuff to do. Like,
yeah. It can kind of be that distant sort of.
And I didn't make him. He came from the backstory, and the guy was like, "I think my guy's probably a dick, and if he's the bad guy at some point, let me know." And I was like,
"He's it.
I'll punch him in for a 9:30. We'll see what happens."
Yeah, I love the idea of taking the characters' backstory and the characters within their characters and their backstories, and making them villains, because there is a story built in there, and the players have buy-in to it. They already have a connection and an emotional attachment to those characters, instead of, well, we rolled into town and there's this dragon eating people. I am emotionally invested in killing the dragon, taking its treasure, and parting its body out for money. It's like, well, that's not really cool. It's like, okay, you roll into a town and it's being taken over by a warlord, and you confront the warlord. You're going to kill him, and they take off their helmet, and it's your fucking mom. Well, that kind of changes the narrative a little bit. That kind of, they have to like actually start making decisions. And it's just, then there's like all kind of party tension too. It's like, well, I don't care if that's your mom. That's the evil warlord. They're killing everybody. But it's my mom. Don't you understand? It's her mom. We can talk to her, and then there's like, that's role playing. That's the interesting thing. How did she get like this? Why is she like that? But you do have to be careful, though. You have to be really careful. Like there's the game I'm currently in is a traveler game, and one of the players, it has a whole bunch of context, because when she rolled up the character, I don't know if you've ever played Traveler before. They use life path systems, and your character can go anywhere. Like, you might have an idea of where you want to start, and you could end up way off left field. Anyway, she has like a whole bunch of contacts, like tons and tons of contacts based on how the character rolled out. And the vast majority of them are acquaintances or friends or business contacts. Only one or two of them are like rival sort of, bad guys. Well, the game master took one of them, who was an interesting character, and made her kind of a bad guy. Not the big bad, but in a certain sort of situation, they were the antagonist of that sort of episode. And afterwards, I was talking to the player, and she was like, I thought that was my NPC. I thought I rolled up my character, points were spent, concessions made, rules were followed, and out of that popped an NPC that was mine. And now it's not mine. And not only is it not mine, it's not what my intention was. Now, it wasn't a big, giant, game-breaking thing. I mean, it was all cool. It was just sort of one of those things like, I'm not sure about that. Sort of thing.
That's an interesting thought, because I think that players give us the best ideas for where to send our story, and I love using backstories and manipulating them and playing around with them. But there is that point where does their autonomy end and mine begin? Mm-hmm. What permission do I have to move characters around and change things? I had a character who set himself up to be obsessed with a certain book that he found. And so I thought, oh, this is so interesting. And so as I, after a couple of sessions, my villain, my big villain was a lich. And so I made it the phylactery of the lich that had this, it basically would suck people in and they get obsessed with it and then eventually go crazy and run and hide it. So I started getting to him, and and he didn't intend that, but he left it a little bit loose. He kind of left it hanging. He was like, no, it was supposed to be this book from blah, 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 blah. So it made it so personal, because it eventually led to his demise. So it was so close to home. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's interesting. That's maybe, did I overstep by taking his story and making it different?
I think that's to me, the fundamental building block of any villain is just like the fundamental building block of any other part of the game. It all comes down to trust. If you have the trust, you can tell the story. So if the players feel like they can never beat the bad guy, I have a friend, and the way he likes to tell his stories, he likes to have the villain come in, beat the shit out of everyone, and then walk away to establish dominance, sort of bearing his throat to beta pups or some shit. And I hate that. I do not like that idea. I don't like the idea that you're my guy is the best, you're the worst. Welcome to the leveling part of the game where you have to get up to my level. If you don't have that trust, it's not going to work. I feel anyway. So I'm really interested to hear what you all think about that. I feel like the building of a villain is really just another part of building that trust, because if you can get the players to trust in that story and trust in the growth of that character, you can take villains onto such a higher level than just, here's my guy, he's bad, he burns things, but
he sucks.
Yeah, he sucks so bad. I had a
which is it? Does he suck or does he burn?
He can't do both. With trust, you wouldn't ask that question, Chad. We don't have that trust yet. No, but I mean,
the worst DM ever. It's so unbalanced.
There was a villain. I made this bad guy who he was searching out an item in D&D called the Deck of Many Things, and the problem was that he had a glove that let him pull whatever card he wanted to, and he was a terrible, boring sorcerer. But he had a group of people that were really good. They were helping him get there, and since they saw his beginnings, as he finally got the deck and started doing crazy world-changing things, that trust was built because they saw how he got there, and then they watched him grow. When you watch villains grow and commit greater atrocities, I feel like it helps instill that trust subconsciously, because you're seeing the story, you're a part of it and stuff like that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or.
Well, I think you've touched on one thing I think is absolutely fundamental to making a villain is that they have to be fully and 100% entirely convinced that they are the good guy. You can't make a villain. I don't say you can't, but I think that villains who like are like, ooh, I love evil, are they have a place in like a campy, fun, goofy campaign. But if you want to make one that is really genuine, no snidely whiplashes, you're going to need to make them truly believe in their cause. And sometimes too, they
or victim of their cause, like Dracula. Dracula can be interpreted as a tragic villain. You know, he did not necessarily want to be that, but then he's also reprehensible because he didn't actually do anything to not be Dracula and evil and that sort of thing. So that's another take on a villain.
Miss meetings, or
right. I mean, I guess the question too is with Dracula: is Dracula a villain or just an animal force of nature? Too
depends on the story.
It does depend on the story.
Really love to wrap around it, but I think the core concept of Dracula is that Dracula is an actual force of evil. He may, sometimes in stories he's sympathetic, sometimes in stories he's the victim, but I think overall he is, if he didn't love what he did, then he'd be a victim. But maybe it took longer than normal for someone to probably break down, but he is someone who he wears fucking capes like a normal person. He's in it. Like there's so many chances of dialogue where he's just like, so perhaps the same could be said of all mortals. Fuck off, dude. You're a bad guy. Like you want me to like you. You're
How
here
can
for
I
lunch.
like you? I'm food.
Yes.
Like,
like at the end of the day, you don't think you're
ends.
talking to an equal. You think that you're teaching me something.
Yeah.
That's a villain. Everyone who does that is
that's a stupid villain because that's like me going to a farm and talking to a cow and saying, you must accept this. In fact, that was even a subplot in Hitchhiker's Guide because it was cruel to eat an animal that did not necessarily want to be eaten. So they genetically engineered an animal intelligent enough to want to be eaten.
Right. But no, the internet is full of like a bunch of villains on a casting couch. Yeah. There's like me. Oh, great. You don't even know what it's like in my city. Perhaps I could talk like. But
yeah, I think a villain who truly believes in their cause is it's going to lend them to trying to convince people to join them, trying to, monologuing, which can be awkward, but can be really fun. Like I don't know. We all want that moment where we can monologue a little bit and finally give some exposition before the players slaughter our bad guys.
Well, I wonder if like there's any meat on the bone of this conversation of like, I think there's so many different types of villains, right? And like, I think that every one of us probably has our favorite version of a villain. Like, cause I love, like going back to Final Fantasy, I love Kefka because he was just an agent of chaos. He had no motive. He had no reason to do what he did.
He was the villain who enjoyed being a villain
because he wanted to break things, right? And so I wonder, like, is there any meat on this bone of trying to talk about the different types of villains and how you go about building them? Like, because, like, for instance, what is your favorite like villain? Each of you, either specifically or type. Like, I think I've got a feel for it, but I'm really curious what each of you thinks is like. Not just your favorite villain, but like your go-to, your good one. Like if you really want to impress a group, I got to get on this. Like,
my favorite kind of villain is one who's just doing his thing. You know, I'm not saying he's a workaday Joe, but you know, he is there. He's doing his thing, and it's like the players are overlaying their morality on him. And, you know, when he encounters the players, he's like, "What's up, guys? This is great, isn't it?" And but on a more intellectual level, you know, I want the players to go after the villain, to go after them, confront them, have a conversation with them, and then be like, I need to go away and think about this for a minute because I'm not sure you're wrong, damn it. And that makes me angry.
Yeah.
That to me, that's a victory. That's a villain victory right there.
I think that what players tell me was my their favorite villain was there was a group of people, and it kind of plays into what you're saying. Like, there was a group of people called the Chronos, and what they found out, their world was conquered by dragons. They finally killed the last dragon, and they found out through certain means that the dragons had control of time, and they had been erasing time to get to the point where dragons rule. When they found the time source of what the dragons were using, they're like, well, we could do better than that. But as they got to the end of their timeline, they didn't like what happened, and they've changed the world about 12 times since then, because, eventually it ends, right? Like, well, bullshit, doesn't make any sense. They kept tampering with the world worse and worse, and they got to the point where they realized it doesn't work. Time doesn't work. It's time to break apart reality. And so I really like that that group kind of villain. Those are my favorite, for lack of a better term, Kingdom Hearts. There is an Organization 13, and they all have one goal, but each one has their own flavor. And so the Chronos would jump from world to world and knock out the pillars of history that helped give it its solidity, or strength, its whatever. And so they were going from world to world and erasing important events. They didn't have to erase all of time. They just had to knock out the things where reality and time didn't work anymore. And I lost a few worlds to it in that campaign, but they really liked it because it gave a chance for them to hear the thought process of each Chronos. Those are my favorite, the ensemble group, where there was one of them who delighted in watching individual timelines die. They would take out someone's great-great-grandmother and just watch people turn to sand. And there was one person who didn't want to do this, but we're far past the point where he could leave the group. And then there was the main villain, things like that. I love that's my favorite kind of villain to play, is the group of villains that each get to show off a different part of their personality.
I think my favorite way to play is to bring my players to the point where they're questioning who the villain is. So a villain who has possibly, maybe not diametrically opposed, but opposing conflicting views, but has intentions that are not entirely different from what the players might have, and their methods are a little bit more horrific. So, at one point too, most players will start to go on down dark paths, and make difficult decisions and do things that would traditionally be considered evil. And so if I can make them face a villain and at that time feel like they're looking in a mirror, that's the kind of villain I want to create. Somebody who is not so unlike the players. But there's also elements of somebody that's pure evil. I really like Hela from Thor Ragnarok. I really liked her. She was just, she's the goddess of death. So she's just, of course she's going to come and kill everybody. That's her whole deal. And she's just we all sort of agree, death is not great. We don't really want that. And so she seems entirely evil. And of course her methods are awful. But it's, I like that too. But when I'm playing the game, I want that moment of reflection.
Yeah. I have, the main villains, I guess, of the podcast that I'm running, it's been going on for a little while now, are called the Nightmares. And they're basically the idea that dreams are these essences that exist. And when they're exposed to the pain that humanity just either suffers or inflicts on each other, they become twisted and they become nightmares, and they're these sickly, dark shapes that, like, whenever they hit you, they start to see what you're afraid of, and then they shape themselves into your realities and stuff like that. And they have like no real goals. They're just like a virus, and they're basically just what happens when people come into a nice place.
Yeah, that's solid. That's good.
And they're almost limitless. And it's been really fun to watch players battle them out, think of new tactics and stuff, but also slowly learn. I'm only saying some of that because it finally came out, but like slowly learn this giant story behind them. Sometimes I like those villains where there's so much story and lore behind it that you get a chance to really dig into them, whether it's a person or a movement or an essence. I think anytime the players are free to explore a villain or a villainous plot in their way, it automatically becomes a great villain.
Yeah.
Because then they have the autonomy. Yeah. I think we got a question in the chat right now that says, what type of villain do they wish they could do a better job of playing? I love that. Like, yeah, what villain do we suck at? No, but what villain do we wish we could pull off better?
I wish that I could pull off one that you had mentioned earlier, which is the group villain. I think I'm pretty good at doing a individual because I could map out the connections that the individual has, their motivations. They are trying to go from point A, they're trying to get to point B, and those meddling kids are in the middle. And that just all works for me. But the group, because I've done group villains before, and it just seems to me that when I run them, it's diluted. You know, they're interesting characters in the same way like a team of wrestlers are interesting individuals, but they're still kind of a team. And you know, they're all kind of the samey, and it's like they're all moving towards this goal, which is really just the leader's goal, and they're following the leader because I can only wrap my head around the one person and they're just kind of the followers. But like, and a henchman is not the same as a team of villains, you know?
Right.
Because I think that like you'd be a really good game master to run a good villain who has henchmen. You'd be a better game master to run an evil team of equals. You would be a really, really good game master if you did what's the DC League of Evil the Anti-Justice League or whatever. Because it's like
I got it mixed up with Scott Pilgrim, like the League of Evil X. The
League of Evil X, yeah.
Legion of Doom, thank you.
Legion of Doom, yeah, there you go. And because you have these bad guys who are on a team, they all have individual characters and motivations, and they are generally working together for temporary gains, but they're also evil and they're backstabbing each other and such. And they all have separate motivations. To me, that would be really interesting to run and a big challenge to run as well.
I think I have trouble playing an environmental villain, like a disease or something that's not tangible.
Oh, I was going to say, just watch Captain Planet. They got a lot of environmental.
So like, it's not one guy. It's like, I don't know, radiation poisoning. It's you get the idea. Because I just like deep down, I feel bad making all my players sick. And like, I just to hamstring my players in any way, like if they can't, you know, they're sick and they can't rest and they get exhausted and all that kind of stuff. I feel like, am I taking away gameplay from them? Am I taking, you know, because if this is kind of all around, and then, you know, that can affect their families and stuff like that. I have trouble being ruthless. Whenever I play a game, I always play the good guy, and I have I have trouble going that full distance. So I find it easier to kind of distill it into one person and you know, remove it a little bit, not make it quite so present. So I have trouble with that, and I would love to do a really good man versus environment kind of game.
It sounds similar to, maybe I'm misreading it, but it sounds similar to the death spiral effect that some games have, like Savage Worlds, where like once players get fucked enough, it just gets worse for them here on out, and now they're I don't know if that's what that chimes in with what you're saying. That's what it sounds like to me. Yeah, it's when you start hitting the players in a way where now they're mechanically really gonna stop.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So when I'm messing around with their everyday life, like not letting them rest, not letting them, I think Pathfinder does a really good job of this with diseases. You got to roll the next day, and if you fail, you go down the track, and roll the next day. You fail, you go down the track, and I worry that it's taking away autonomy. That's my concern, that I'm making it no longer fun. And that's not necessarily the case. Like, that can still be a lot of fun. It can, overcoming that can be even better. So I get kind of tied up, like, oh, I can't do something like that. I prefer to have an identifiable person or group or whatever.
Something you said earlier in that, where you said that you had a hard time because you like playing the good guys, you like playing, the sort of the do-gooders. A villain does not have to be evil, because if you think about it, your party is they're not necessarily good. But let's take off the table that you have an evil party and the bad guys are the good guys. That's not what I'm talking about here. Your party, in fact, let's take morality off the table for a minute. Your party, if they're well made and you have a good world, should have aims and goals and motivations. You can have villains that are not evil, that just run counter to those aims, goals, and motivations.
Right, and that's actually what I said earlier. That's my favorite kind of villain to play. One that's just sort of opposed to what the players want and goes about it in sort of dastardly ways. I actually had, in one campaign, I had...
They don't even have to go about it in dastardly ways. They could maybe just call the cops. The lawyer.
That's right. I had someone on Reddit posted like, oh, I don't have time for a D&D campaign, but I would love to like play a villain behind the scenes. And I was like, so I contacted this guy, and he just, after a session, I'd tell him what my players did. And then he would just create all these crazy machinations behind the scenes that were happening. And then so I'd unleash these crazy this guy had the best monsters. I'd unleash these crazy monsters, and like these he would like make golems out of people and just do all these awful things that I would never have thought of. I have trouble making going that next step. So it was kind of nice to have somebody else do it for me.
I think that the villain that I have the toughest time with, but I want to preface it as greedy as it may sound, it may not be me that has a problem. It may be that my players are the problem. Because I have a goofy bunch of players, right? So they're always willing to laugh at something. I have a really hard time pulling off the reveal villain in my current groups.
Okay.
So who is it? Who is that? This actually happened, throw myself under the bus, or them. Maybe it's the players that suck. Are they the baddies? But season 4 of World Walkers, the whole time you're not really sure, in theory, who the villains are. You have a villain show up in the beginning, they dispatch them, they go about learning who they are and why they were targeted, and then suddenly towards the end of the season, the villains show up. And it's a big reveal of you didn't know that you were actually a part of it. And they're like, fuck off. I was like, wait, what? And they're like, you're a weird dude in a city trying to talk to me. I don't need this. I need to know. And I was like, but the plot.
But my plot.
Don't you think it's weird that you were... Not really. You're creepy. Go away. The reveal film would be my thing.
I had somebody describe to me something he did in a game that basically his players were tasked with moving. These people were under threat from a certain demon or dragon. It was a group of a certain religion. And so this demon would come and slaughter them all. So they were like, okay, well, we need to get these people out of the city. So they round them all up and put them on trains and send them out of the city. And so it got better, and then it got worse. And so they kept finding these people and sending them away until gradually they started to realize what was really happening is that the powers that be were rounding up groups of people in this one religion and sending them to like labor camps, like they didn't actually know. And so then their big reveal was like they got to one of these places and were horrified. I was like, that is genius. That's amazing. You're the villains the whole time. You didn't even know.
That's great. There's a question in chat from, and I'm sorry I didn't mention the last person who has a young one too, I believe. But Dusty Van
City?
Yeah. Says, what would you say would be the best note to a GM to run a memorable villain besides the backstory connections? I think that go-to, my gut, maybe I'll think of a better tip in a minute, but like my go-to is like figure out what your favorite villain is, because villains oftentimes are you putting yourself in their shoes, right? Like they're like very much the NPC that you gotta really fall in love with yourself. So like if you love what the villain's doing, there's like so many other parts of the game. Your passion is what people like in so many, whether that's like any kind of creative endeavor. If you love it, people can hook onto that a lot easier than if you did the calculations and created the perfect scenario where a villain hits all the. If you love it, and that's like weird advice because I don't like that stuff. Like just do it, but like I really think like if you figure out the kind of, take a minute to study the kind of villains that you like and put together your favorite villain. Like take the components down. Like what did you love about Vader? What did you love about this? And if you can, like, don't just think about it, like write it down, write the couple of attributes and story plot moments that you liked about that villain, make your villain based on that. I think that'll go a long way to getting you to someone faster than say like, make sure they have a sweet sword.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt though. Sweet sword would be awesome.
Yeah. That's what I think.
So we're fighting Vader. I want some boots of dancing. Make sure Vader has boots of dancing.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I might
make sure Vader can cha-cha.
Right. I mean, because that's canon, right?
Right. What do you all think though?
Well, I'm not sure. Like I cannot, it would be hard for me to imagine a player trying to give me a note in the middle of a campaign saying, hey, can we do this with a villain? Now, I mean, if they said, hey, is the barkeep who's been kind of weird and maybe has some odd connections and he never lets us go in the basement.
Wait, is that what I said? Or is that what you thought I said?
Well, what would you say would be the best note to a GM to run a memorable villain?
Oh, I thought he was saying advice. Like, what advice would you give to a GM?
I read it as note. Like, what would be the best note to give to a GM?
I guess we need clarification, but I thought it was like, what would I give if I were giving a note or a comment to somebody, like advice? If I misread it, yeah, I apologize. But
that's that's what I interpreted it as well. But
okay. So going off the advice thing, let's roll back here for a second. The advice thing is very situational. Like, are we talking about a new GM in their first game? Are we talking about a veteran GM?
Advice note, yeah. So
yeah, who wants to do something different?
I always assume novice that way because the veteran will be like, yeah, I got it, asshole. Like,
we don't listen to you.
If a veteran says, hey, I got it, I know it. I've been gaming since I was like 14, and I'm 43 now, and I have an entire show. Yeah, 5. I have an entire show that we have been doing for over 10 years that is entirely based around the fact that we're terrible at role-playing games. And then all of the advice around that. No one is a veteran GM. If you're a veteran GM, then that means that you're just running the same thing over and over again and you have it polished to a fine, boring hone. It's like you need to take chances. You need to make mistakes. You need to learn. That's the great thing about the hobby. So yeah, I would absolutely give advice to veteran GM.
I mean, not that I wouldn't, I just assume because I don't know where they're coming from, so I don't want to assume experience level. Yeah, and because like you're saying, advice is practical no matter what. So I don't really ever think about, because you were saying like which one, novice versus veteran.
Yeah, I
don't usually assume because advice is good advice usually no matter what. But did you have anything, Scrim, that you were thinking? Like your one note,
I'd just say try to make it as present as possible. So like if it's some big evil emperor people talk about taxes and talk about how they're, now they're destitute because of this, or if it's Matt Colville had a really awesome thing, and I can't remember his video series name, but he like his suggestion was, in an early in the game, bar fight breaks out, somebody dies. And so this guy comes in, like kind of floats in, and he looks delighted and offers to pay the person who killed him like a certain amount of money and takes the thing away, takes the body away. So he's like collecting like this weird one little moment where this guy does this weird creepy thing, and it's just right in front of your face, and it, it'll keep coming up and nobody really knows why, what's going on. Like things like that, just having moments like that all the time makes it feel like, urgent. That's what I'd say. But I wanted to also answer Angry Cheese Toast's question. Have you ever had a player character reveal themselves to be a villain? And to clarify, they've been working with the DM the whole time, and they show that they're the villain. No, I have not had that. And honestly, as a player, I don't know if I'd like it.
I until he added the working with the DM part, I would have answered that with nearly every single game I've played or ran over my entire career, players are always the villains. They're always breaking the law and doing bad things and going outside the box. I mean, that's part of the fantasy, is that you don't conform to society. But have I ever had one reveal themselves as a villain working with the GM? Not really. I've had characters like go off the rails, and then there was sort of a mutual consent of, you're kind of the bad guy now, right? And I'm like, yeah, I think you are. But I've never had a game where from the start, everyone's making their character, and Joe Bob pulls me off to the side, says, okay, I got this great thing. 6 months in, I'm a vampire and I'm there to kill everybody or something like that. I'm like, no, how about you just play your character and I'll take care of the bad guy stuff. So,
I have two quick stories. The first one is, it's an open secret that I don't necessarily enjoy the Warlock class in D&D. We'll leave that off to the side for a second, but suffice to say that I don't usually allow them to be played in the settings that I have, right? And so I had left it off the table for a long, long time, and then finally a player's like, I really want to do this. I want to play. I'm like, all right, cool. And we play a game. He's got his character. At the end of the game, everyone leaves, and he comes to me and goes, okay, so I want to fuck the party over because I'm a warlock, right? And I was like, God, fucking damn it. Like, this is why I should have known. I know. He was like, I'm just, I don't think I'll actually kill them. So pissed. The second one is,
in 5th edition, the entire class of warlock revolves around the fact that they don't want to be in the party. They don't like the people they're with, and they're like not good. And or I don't know. I ran a 5th edition game for a long time, and I loved all the classes and stuff, and nobody played a warlock. And I was reading through it. I'm like, all of the powers, all the ability, all the lore, the entire feel of it is this person is a loner. The entire game is about teamwork. But this class isn't.
I said,
it's like, where the hell did this even come from?
That's the totality of my warlock comments for the night. But my other story is I have done it where the group was investigating a troop, like a play, and they knew that there was a doppelganger out there. And so they burst in, and they thought that the person who was going to be assassinated was in trouble. And one of the players steps up, brings up the dagger, goes for the attack, and reveals themselves as a doppelganger. And I was like, okay. And then, Carl, you burst into the room. You've been trying to catch up with the group the whole time. And the doppelganger that stole your look is right there ready to make the kill. So I didn't reveal the player to be the villain. I revealed the fact that he played the character the whole time because the doppelganger had been following them and did a perfect impersonation. And then had the player's character come in immediately. So he never had to stop playing, but explained that he had been tied up and had been struggling to catch up with the group. So that's the closest I've ever gotten.
That's kind of like if you were playing a Marvel sort of superhero game, and then you've been playing for a while, and then without the players knowing, you introduce the Kree Skrull thing in.
Exactly.
And it's just there are 1d6 Skrull in the team now. So
and then
but they've been there the
players
whole
show
time.
Up.
Yeah.
To be like, no, that's
cool.
not. Yeah,
that's cool.
I did that. That's the closest I've ever gotten besides the asshole warlock.
I did have a player who set up a split personality. I know some people don't like that trope, but it was really interesting how he did it. There was two personalities, and they were controlling one body, and they were totally different class. So he'd roll every time he woke up. He'd roll a d20, and at a certain point, certain values he was one, and certain values he was the other. And so he played it really well. A total different personality. One was running for things, really brash ranger. The other one was kind of holding back, quieter bard. And it was very interesting. Certainly not villainous. So a little bit off topic there, but
I had that once. I had someone who wanted to do a split personality, but the personality was his mom's demonic soul in his body, and he was a pacifist.
Well,
so,
that's one way to do it.
This episode's called Pedro's Mistakes.
Yeah.
I had no longer with us.
I had an NPC once that was it was a player's mother, and she had run off, and she had been ran off because she was a warlock. In 5th edition game, the NPC was a warlock. And I played it to where, she was like a 20th level warlock or whatever. And I played it as a sort of split personality. The demon that possessed her, instead of just fighting and fighting and fighting and roiling and fighting and never getting anywhere, I mean, they had done that for years, way off camera, had come to a detente. And they sort of had been at this detente so long that the demon had feelings and sympathies that were the mother's, that kind of meshed over to it. And then the mother had feelings and motivations and angers and horribleness from the demon that had meshed over into her as well. And I didn't do the sort of tennis match that you see in some games where people play split personalities, where it's like, I'm the demon. It's like, oh, but I love you, but I'm still going to kill you. It's like, that's just goofy as shit. It's like I instead played this sort of character that had these contradictions. It's just like, I love you so much that I had to leave, otherwise I would have murdered you. And it's and it's like all of these contradictions. I mean, it's a crazy person. It's a person who for 20 years had been possessed by a demon, and the demon was just like, I guess I'm you now. And then the person was like, I guess I'm you. And
who was possessing who?
Right. Now there's this new third crazy person, and the other two don't exist anymore.
I love it. That's so interesting.
It was really interesting to play. It was very interesting. That's what I love about villains, because while this character was not the villain or even a villain, it's interesting to get into their headspace. Because even when you play as a player, not that Pedro would know this because he doesn't play, but when you play games, I mean, generally you're
20 years.
Generally you're the good guy, or maybe you're the neutral guy. Rarely I've seen people play the bad guy. I've played a couple of evil campaigns, but even the evil campaigns are different. It's like there's maybe a gonzo aspect to it, or maybe, it's just like, well, there's a righteousness, or maybe it's, the world just doesn't understand me and I'm going to rob banks. When you make a good villain, it is really interesting to get into their headspace, because it isn't that gonzo crazy sort of thing. It's like, you, as a game master, start asking yourself, why? There's this whole framework of the world, and now there's this person in it. Why are they like that? Why are they doing this? How can I expand them and make them interesting, rather than the Snidely Whiplash tying people up and throwing them on train tracks sort of evil? And you get into stuff because you take a person or a personality and you break them, and they're sort of broken and shattered or damaged in some way, which set them on this path of not doing good things. As long as you're not playing they're not really a bad guy, they just run counter. If you're playing like an evil villain, then it's just like, what went wrong in their life? Who hurt them? How did they hurt themselves? What are these shattered pieces of a personality? It's like taking a picture of a person and painting it on a mirror, a piece of glass, then dropping it. And then you sweep up those broken shards of glass that are so dangerous, and you try to piece back a character, and it's different and not right. And then that's your villain. And it's really interesting, at least for me, to play those characters, because you get into the stuff like the guy's mother, who was the warlock, who had come to a détente with the demon, and it wasn't a split personality. It was a new broken personality that didn't make any sense, because she left us and was now this thing. But it's also interesting too, like political villains, because I love politics. I love political villains. I love history and stuff, and economics and sociology, and I love like making this sort of working, at least in my mind, working sort of framework of a world, and then putting someone in there, and it's just like, how are they maneuvering behind the scenes? How are they moving in ways that the players don't see? Why are they moving that way? Why are they running counter to society and how things work? Why do they want to change that? Why, because they want power and money and just take over. It's just like, well, no, you can get an MBA and become an executive narcissist and just run a corporation, treat people poorly, make lots of money. And it's just like, no, that's not a villain. Why are they a villain? Why, how are they broken in some way?
It reminds me of, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and you can, I won't interrupt your comment any further. The chat's talking about best villains. So I'm trying to think of mine. I'm trying to best villain ever from pop culture or whatever. So
anywhere.
Oh, from pop culture or from one that we've made?
In general, it's pop culture. That's what we got.
Pop culture? Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, Pedro, continue what you were, your point.
No, I very much like villains. I like living worlds. I like things always going on. I like what I call the San Dimas rule from Bill and Ted. Like the clock in San Dimas is always ticking, regardless of how much you time travel. And I didn't know there was a name for it. In Dungeon World, they call it fronts, where like you have I haven't read all of Dungeon World, but I guess the idea is like, and I was excited because it's what I do, but not as refined and cool as Adam. But it's the idea of like, you have your villain, you have your goals, and then you figure out what do they need to succeed, and they're always moving forward. And so you figure out what do they need to conquer, and you just keep the world and the plate spinning. Even if the heroes are doing something else, it makes the villains seem more, it makes the villains seem almost like, you get so much more texture out of them because they're always advancing their plot. They don't need the heroes there. But yeah.
Question from Young One too: what character that is a hero would you rather be, or do you see as a villain? Because I've been trying to wrap my brain around the worst, like your favorite villain question. So I will answer that with the same character that I would have said is Iron Man.
I was going to say that.
Scooped you. So specifically in the Civil War comic series.
Yeah, that's
He's a bad guy.
Oh, Pedro, yes. He's the ultimate bad guy, but he has like this rich and like almost good motivation for doing what he does, but
it's very realistic.
Well,
it's
because
just so good.
If Tony Stark gets his way in the comic book Civil War, Aunt May is dead. That's all there is to it. If Tony Stark gets his way, Peter Parker reveals Aunt May is assassinated by Peter Parker's enemies. But it's for the greater good. So is Tony Stark bad?
Oh, he's fucking garbage.
He's the worst. Tony Stark was made to see, it was a challenge to see if you could make a person, a character that you like, but you're supposed to hate. You should hate them, but you actually like them. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what he is, because he's the worst.
Yeah, he's the worst. But he's smart, and he's confident, and and what's really great about his character in the movies is that he's very human because he fails. Yeah. He fails constantly. But
Downey Jr. is great. He's one of my favorites.
Oh, he's amazing.
Yeah. But he fails with such style and grace when he does it. You know, he fails with
fails up.
Yes, he does.
Like everyone in corporate, which you don't ever get fired, you just fucking fail up.
Which when you watch it, you're like, wow, that's really cool. And but then when you think about it, it's like, oh no, he didn't really pay for anything, did he? You know, well, I mean, I guess
he paid himself for the damage with damage control.
Yeah. Oh.
Spoilers.
How is that a Spider-Man?
Yeah.
But that's a great question. I think if I had to change my answer, which I do because of my answer, what character that is a hero would you rather be or do, or do you see as a villain? And that answer for me is actually Batman. I would love to see, because there's a lot of commentary on like he could just fix everything. He's so rich, you know, and it's a comic and you're supposed to. But if I wanted, like, I would love to see a story examine him as a villain but like not like the Joker's a lawyer and he's being an asshole, like, and he's really mean. No, literally, like the idea of a billionaire who is keeping this city a playground. He could fix it. But he's aware. Well, I'm not saying like the typical arguments, but just literally doing a story like a one-off where he knows he could put in the money into certain areas and he wants a city.
I would say I have two things to say about that. One, his father tried that and failed. He tried to fix the city with his money and he failed, depending on the storyline. Right. Two, Batman is already a bad guy. He's a vigilante. And he goes and he grabs people and he pulls them off the street and there's no evidence, there's no due process, there's nothing. And because there is none of that, they can't put any of them in prison.
Right. But because all superheroes are bad guys in that regard.
Because they're wearing crazy outfits and doing weird stuff.
Like in the
they get
context
put in an insane asylum.
Right. But in the context of Gotham and the fact, like, from the story's point of view, he is the good guy. But I would love to see a story where he blatantly knows, like he purposely keeps money from areas so that he can keep them ripe with crime and take advantage of it. Yeah. Kind of like Cops Now. Oops. We shouldn't have that conversation here.
I mean,
all right. So on that note,
Running with Cops is a great podcast that lets you explore the television show Cops and how they keep their show going.
Oh, damn. That's dark. That's dark.
Anyway, I would love to see that Batman, a Batman that refuses to reinvigorate the different areas of his city. And
so that he can continue
so that Batman. He can be a man that goes out and beats people with his fist and the cool toys that he spends millions of dollars on.
And that's kind of like that story. And that's kind of like Mysterio too, you know, because that's Mysterio's. It's not quite his shtick, but in a certain way it is.
Mysterio with financial backing,
right,
and a board of directors. But I know they've touched on it. Batman, Bruce's father's like that, but like this one where he's like, Gotham's mine.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But sorry, I kind of went on there, but
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we're getting ready to wrap up. Any final thoughts before we put this one to bed?
I just want to make an appropriate cop joke.
More cop jokes.
No, fall in love with your villains is my advice. Again,
Yeah.
if you fall in love with your villains, you're going to be amazed at what you can do because it lets you step out of yourself and just be a fan of them. And then when you love something, usually your players love it.
Yeah. You gotta really take the temperature of the table too, and kind of understand how far you are pushing your villain. Because if you are not making a villain that is a Snidely Whiplash, killing people just for the fun of it, and that means to me, you probably want your characters to interact with the villain, to talk to them, to challenge them, to be challenged by him. But if you push their evil too far, the players the villain just turns into a monster because then they're kill on sight. There's no conversation. So you really have to balance that and understand the temperature of the room.
Create a villain, but don't become the villain.
Right.
Ooh, deep. I think to take them seriously and to, don't they do these evil things, but they do these evil things because of this.
Yeah.
Don't give the players a hook to say oh, well, that's the reason that you're the absolute worst. You don't need to find that because they will totally find it themselves. Just give them their own motivation, their own selves, and respect who they are, and you're gonna get a memorable villain.
All right. And go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you.
So once again, I'm Scrim. I frequent on the Shadowcasters network as a DM and a player. So hit me up there. Schedules on Twitch.
And I'm Chad. I am on feartheboot.com, role-playing game advice podcast. You can also find me at morningsky.com. That's morning, SKYE.com.
And I'm Pedro, GM and creator of World Walkers. Search for us wherever fine podcasts are given away. You can look for World Walkers COG is our steam-powered themed one. And then World Walkers, the other ones, is about if heroes were given to Destiny and said, fuck that, let's do a self-startup instead.
All right. Well, thank you, Scrim, Chad, and Pedro for hosting this week. And thank you to Young One 2, who had 2 great questions for us. And then Dusty Van City, and then, as always, Angry Cheese Toast coming in with some strong questions as well. Next week, hosts are Pete. Scrim's back again for another week. And Dan will be joining in. So we will see you next week.
Later on.
Later.
Yeah.